Happy Monday, everybody. How you doing?
Doing well. Good to see you, Joe. Welcome, Brian.
Hey,
Welcome
I'm
back.
gonna slowly take a sip of my water to make sure I don't choke this time.
Okay. All right. That's a good plan.
Or choke. It might be. I don't know. Kind of funny, but
I think I'm gonna choke in other ways today. We'll see.
okay. Well,
I
yeah.
doubt
Stay
it.
tuned for that. Yeah. Yeah. Welcome back to the show. I think it was kind of funny. I think last time you were on the show, we did we not talk. We didn't even talk about what we were supposed to talk about. So.
No.
And I think on this show we're not going to talk about what you wanted to talk about again. So this is just an active bait and switch.
I know we're never going to get around to this thing because here's the thing. So last time, we just to recap everybody, if you haven't seen the episode before, I wanted to give everybody this lowdown on data virtualization, talking basically through my experiences at Trino. I had just moved into the Iceberg community at that point, but had already wanted to had this big, thought of data virtualization, how we need to bring it back to the forefront and back to the forefront of the conversation, and why that was. That also plays into a lot of these other pieces like, Lakehouse and governance and all these other things that still are actively being answered at this point. And so I wanted to hop in right on this one that we scheduled for this time to talk about the way that data the way that data virtualization plays into the whole data mesh concept and plays into how we actually can achieve governance and all this kind of stuff. And I really wanted to talk about that, but then I pulled up this meme to kind of explain the way that these events happen.
Real quick, yeah.
So Joe, I reached out to Joe and I was like, hey Joe, let's follow up on that data mesh thing. And then since then, I've released this blog. You may have seen it. It's the title of what we're talking about today. And Joe had to make a really hard decision where it's like, let's talk about the topic Brian wanted to discuss versus the topic everybody actually wants to hear. Joe, you're a man of the people, so I didn't disagree with your judgment here, but I definitely was like, oh, that's what we're talking about now.
Well, I know good clickbait when I see it, and
I don't think Joe is sweating this. I think if Joe were on Twitter, he'd be he'd be tweeting the most provocative things possible.
Yeah.
So here we are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But we can talk about the topic you want to talk about. We can talk about Iceberg. We can talk about whatever else is on our minds.
I mean, I'm happy to talk about Iceberg first. It's definitely a timely thing, so I think it makes sense that we go there. And then if we don't end up getting around to the whole data mesh thing, then you just have me on again.
Yeah, so
Right.
LinkedIn user says his name is actually Jason Taylor, but data mesh with Iceberg, we can also get into that too, I guess. Yeah, it's kind of funny actually. Ben Rogojan, he just had
This morning.
morning had another chat about Iceberg. So I don't know if the Iceberg community's coincidentally out in force this morning, but
I mean, nice. I doubt it's coincidence. Ben, we're on to you.
Yes, copycat over here.
No, he was doing it first. But anyway, yeah. So let's hop into it. Yeah, whatever's on your mind, let's talk about it.
Sure. So, I mean, I wanted to
just meme too here. 1 second. Sorry.
Oh, just keep it up the whole time. Joe sweating the entire show.
Yeah, right.
So I want to talk about my goals with this article. The thing that obviously people really honed into was the title. The title of this particular show and the title of the blog was, it is what it is. It's exactly what you called it, Joe. It's clickbait. It's there to get you to look at the blog. And particularly, I wrote the blog because I wanted to start the discussion around particularly Iceberg and where the spec has gone. So, TLDR, I say that the Iceberg has won, and what does winning even mean? We have to define what that is. What's the war? Everybody's brought up some really good, thoughts around this, and it's because all of this stuff is literally just to get a rise out of people and get them to click on this stuff. I mean, if you're listening to this now, you clearly thought this was interesting. So I made the title a little edgy so that, we get people interested, but that was not my sentiments on an implementation. I want to split this thing apart. There's implementations, right? And then there's the spec. There's the fundamental way that we're talking about, laying out the data that has no association with any particular code or any particular instance of, how the spec has been done. So you look at SQL, right? We have SQL as an open spec. It's, there's multiple variations of even SQL specs out there. So you have ANSI, you have the, what's the ISO, you have various versions, but ANSI is like the common spec that people try to adhere to, for instance, like Trino. And you have like IBM DB2 that follows this really closely. And then you get like, different variations that are less following it, but for the most part, they'll just add like one or two little syntax sugars to make things simple. Or then you have like Hive, that's just a barbaric approach to SQL, right? and all had their own variations of what they wanted, right? So what I wanted to get in with this is that in reality, no implementation has actually won the table format war. No piece of code is better than the other. We're at a very good, particularly Iceberg and Delta are at a very particular good arms race when it comes to just features, right? We can sit there tit for tat. You see people doing this on LinkedIn all the time. If you go to any of these conversations, you'll either find a very heavy, somewhat slight bias towards one or the other, and they'll really just be putting in like, well, this feature, but no, that feature, but then this feature, And it's so close that it's like, right now, it's just not really helping anybody. It's like, you need to specifically dive into your features that you need, and then like actually do a critical analysis yourself, right? And things are constantly going to be changing. And so you see all these other like new blogs come out that are still citing like outdated information about the other. So it's just, at this point, I'm just going to summarize that the implementations are at a pretty close arms race at this point. And it's like, this is the kind of circles that we're going in thinking about implementation details. I wanted, like, when I first heard about Iceberg and just these newer table lake formats, specifically like Delta and Hudi, I really was like, oh, okay, great. This is, addressing a lot of the issues that came up with Hive, and the same way that Trino was fixing the kind of runtime element. Okay, well now we're going to actually make sure that the standard, this like kind of what I still call it the invisible spec of Hive, invisible because it's just lived in engineers' minds, whoever created it, or somewhat in the Metastore code a little bit there, and it's always dependent on which version you had, right? That's always been a problem traditionally since we got into, going away from the relational models and relational databases and stuff like that around warehouses and all that. And we gave that up so that we could scale, go all the way to big data scale. But we've lost since then the ability to correctly translate, bits and bytes in object storage in the cloud. Okay, we needed to migrate to moving to, cloud-based storage too. So that's been going on as well. But we really lost this translation layer between being able to go from the files into SQL and still have all of the same guarantees that we had, back with the data warehouse. And that's long been what, warehouse vendors have been talking about is the shortcomings of, data swamps or and all these other parts, right? Yeah. So that's one. And they're, I mean, to be fair, they're coming around, and I was.
Oh, they adopted Iceberg too.
I am very thoroughly pleased with where I've seen, the trend going for Snowflake, BigQuery, like all these, very commonly data warehouse style systems. I know a lot of them don't like being called data warehouse, but whatever they call themselves,
They're
right?
Cloud data platforms, Brian.
Yeah, cloud data platform. I'm so sorry. Yeah, that's what I meant. So cloud data platform, CDPs. Give me a second. I need to drink some water. I'm talking a lot.
No way. Don't choke. Actually, while you're talking, or while you're waiting here, Roni, I think that's how you pronounce his name. He has got a question. Why is Hive a barbaric approach to SQL? Tell us, Brian. Why is Hive barbaric?
So, it comes up with its own syntax for starters, right? So you have like add jar or something like that, so that you can get some custom functionality. That's nowhere in the SQL spec. And then when you have things like, oh, I want to partition this data to have better performance. Well, you have to now move that partition to the very back of the line and make sure that it's exactly there. And it's probably a duplicate of one of your original columns. So now the analyst has to actually understand, oh, there's actually the data, and then there's the partition column. And so if I query to actually get a performance gain, I have to query out the up, the partition, like goofy stuff like this. It is like absolutely bonkers, the kind of stuff that we had to do with Hive. And I know some of that's getting more implementation detail than SQL. I'm trying to think if there's any other ones off the top of my head that was like very like they would just come up with like, oh, you need to sync with the metastore. Like implementation details would just get like brought up into the SQL. So like I remember there was like a procedure you had to do to get in sync with the metastore all the time. And so if you either got rid of some metadata somehow and that wasn't aligned with your storage on disk, then you had to run some sort of sync to make sure that they were connected. And same thing if it went the other way around where you lost data but the metadata was still there, you had to update the thing to say, oh, there's no more data here, so let's get rid of this table. So it can go like literally just having things get constantly out of sync, and you had to represent all of that SQL in the SQL so that you could, take care of the shortcomings of the Hive implementation, right?
Sounds awesome.
And then, yeah. So anyways, we're getting too far in that, I know.
Can I throw a grenade into the conversation and say that I think that ANSI SQL is also a barbaric approach to SQL?
Yeah.
Because it's so non-standard, it's worse than not having
I remember choosing violence today.
Yeah,
right.
that's
right. I'm not trying to...
we haven't pissed off yet?
Yeah, let's make everybody...
I was gonna say, should we bring up that mic throw that Cardi B did earlier? I think that we'll just bring that in there.
I'm just gonna throw my
totally off data. Yeah, throw it at me right now. Like ANSI SQL is not perfect and by any means, right? But it is the closest thing that we have on that layer, to having some sort of uniformity, and that is widely adopted, widely understood since the 70s. And I don't want to be one of those people that, well, it's been around for this long, so therefore it's really good. But like, think about the implications of it being around that long, right? And the fact that more the 80s, but the fact that that's been now integrated into all this legacy software that understands some old school crusty dialect of SQL, and at least is a starting point to get some people to say, oh, okay, this is SQL. Let's, upgrade to SQL 92, SQL 2016, blah, blah, blah. And we at least have something to kind of reference to have ideally, okay, again, an ideal world, that we're all doing things the same. I understand why some vendors, it's not always like, oh, we want to create our own super secret language because then they're all going to be locked into our version of SQL. I think you do it because, ANSI SQL is quite difficult. There's some things that you can't use. One of the biggest ones I was talking about with Ryan Blue recently was like ANSI SQL does not allow for CTE setups for right before a merge. So if you wanted to like have a nice progressive like building up of some data set, and then at the end just pull that into a merge statement at the very end of that CTE, you can't do that by ANSI SQL standards. And so you have to nest that entire CTE inside of the merge statement, and it looks ugly. But it's like, so you have to trade off. Well, if you had it that way and it was following the spec, and you go to another system like if you go between Trino and DB2, that system will never break. But if you go between Trino and Spark, it breaks because Spark supports that update or merge syntax at the end of that, right? So we're hopping into the SQL stuff a little bit too much, but I do, I agree with you. Like ANSI SQL is never going to be perfect. Like it's really, really, really hard to get like a spec that everybody is even going to remotely like. I tried getting a spec that multiple people liked just within my own, like one company years ago. We were trying to figure out just a model to model like the common data set between teams. And we were just trying to figure out the APIs around that. And that took literally 2 years. And when we made it, everybody we had a basic, like the core structure, and we had like a little bag of words kind of dictionary that if you have one off thing that, one off use case, just throw it into the dictionary as a one-off use case, but try to use the core model. What did everybody end up doing? They used the bag of words like constantly, and there was no uniformity, right? So like specs are just notoriously really, really hard. But I mean, we can't deny that despite the lack of popularity to go 100% full ANSI SQL, there is still some out there, and at least the bar is set to try to get as close as you can to that. The closer you as a vendor are to following that, and the closer you are as a open source project to following that spec, that's just thinking, that's just doing as much responsibility that you can for your user base and for your customer base, right? Because ultimately you want to get, same thing we were talking about with data virtualization, right? The same way we're all standardizing around SQL for that, or at least how we were proposing it there. You have some common ground that people can kind of move back and forth, and they don't have to necessarily know all of the implementation details for switching between query engines. The same thing will go at all the different layers too, and it becomes so much more powerful for users to pick and choose when they want to use you and when they don't. And that's ultimately, it's the same core message in this episode as it was in data virtualization. This one's just, thinking through it through, data warehouse / data lake models that are becoming really popular these days. So
let's get back to the topic though.
Yeah.
Why did Apache Iceberg win the table format wars, in your opinion?
Yeah. So not an implementation, right? So this is the thing I want to clarify for people who had some good criticisms for the article. It is the spec, I believe, that won. And the real reason behind the spec being the winner is that basically Iceberg was initially just, a couple like Trino, Spark, Flink, and it was, what was the fourth one? Oh, and then Dremio, right? So we had 4 engines in the early times whenever Trino was just starting to integrate with it, okay? It was early days, like, basically, we had talked with a lot of the people at Netflix that were already using Trino, and they were saying, hey, this is going to be great. We're going to do some specs on this. And when I got the understanding, when I started playing around with Iceberg, really seeing that spec and how it was being driven by the larger community, how people were thinking very, like, there were these really long drawn out conversations on how, going for one representation versus another is really, kind of like good or bad, right? And so it's the dialogue around how this spec grows that was very appealing to me. And so, that caught on over time. And so you start seeing more frequently today, if you go to the Iceberg website, there's like, a boatload more of engines like StarRox and what was the one that Starbucks was based off of? There's another Apache project.
Oh, Presto.
Doris.
Okay.
Yeah, and then Presto as well. Yeah. So and Presto Trino kind of in the same bucket. Doris, Starburst. No, not Starburst. Also Starburst there though. Hold on, let me think about it.
Stars. Yeah.
All these stars, man. Yeah, Star Tree too. Hold on, give me a second. StarRox, and Doris are also in the same bucket, right? So basically, you have these query engine ones, but then we started seeing something very interesting last year, 2022, during Snowflake Summit. Snowflake announced that they were going to be offering, kind of a very like external table experience, very similar to their Hive experience, but still an external table experience around Iceberg, and that kind of like set an initial trend moving forward. You started seeing a couple more query engines data warehouses or data cloud, cloud data platforms, cloud data platforms that started to, announce their support on top of Iceberg. And this was something that was kind of interesting. Again, very super light, nothing really, really heavy at this point. It's very much like they have their little stack over here and then we have ours. This year, I was writing this blog originally, like not at all anticipating to talk about this. I was actually just going to talk about like why I went from Trino to Iceberg and talk about those. And you see that in the early part of my blog. But then right before I was about to publish this, like the whole Snowflake Summit and Databricks events kind of that were happening on basically the same week, they both announced like effectively some level of support for Iceberg. On Snowflake side, they ramped it up, and they aren't particularly using it as like a native type of table format, right? And I can talk about the some of the nuances there a little bit, but so Snowflake is now actually enabling kind of a data interchange format between them and Iceberg. And so this is like kind of one step even further than just thinking like they have their thing, we have ours. They're actually building metadata around still the Snowflake storage, but still not, doing the full like native experience. And this is kind of a nice halfway, right? Because it's like, it gives you the ability to see things in an Iceberg world, but it's still stored in a Snowflake underlying data format. So, that's really cool. And it had some good performance implications. The same reason why you want to use Snowflake in the beginning or any other like cloud data, is it cloud data provider?
Cloud data platform and fully managed, especially, right? Like fully managed, proprietary, you get those advantages, but still get Iceberg. Yeah.
Yeah. So, or you get to look at it like it's Iceberg, right? But it is not actually Iceberg 100%. And that's where really the nuance starts to come in of like, well, what is official support for Iceberg and all that kind of stuff. But at least this is incredible, right? When I saw that, I was like, wow, that is, I mean, first Snowflake came out with that. We heard about that, I think, early on in the week. Then later in the week, there was the Uniform announcement. So Uniform is basically Databricks' basically implementation, client implementation that talks to not only just the format that has traditionally been used with their platform, which is Delta Lake. They also added in support for both the Hudi format and the Iceberg format. And so what this was, yet another, oh my gosh, both of them did it, right? So if you look at these two were literally having conferences the same week. These two big vendors in the space that are constantly fighting on social. We're all used to it. We know the antics, right? They're going head to head, and now this has been the only basically protocol that is supported across both of these two big giant vendors, right? One that was traditionally the Lakehouse vendor doing the Lakehouse thing, and the other one was doing the cloud data platform thing. And now it's like, okay, well, now we have some interoperability here. It's not great. Again, like very, very limited support. It's not there to actually get that, but the foothold is there. And once the foothold is there, the thing for me is that customers are going to now be like, oh, well, you've opened Pandora's box. I now expect this to run like a native format. I now expect this interchange format. And so that's the part that's super interesting to me. And so, so
Redshift also supports Iceberg tables now.
Redshift,
a couple days ago.
Yeah, as of a couple of days, we have.
They're always on top of things there, so it's great.
Yes. No. The Redshift team is great. We've been talking to them a lot, and they're great people. I don't want to say anything bad about them. And also, my old colleague from my previous job, he works there. So if I say anything, we're old foosball buddies, and we have like all sorts of rivalries going on. We don't need more. So
trying to stir the pot here, Brian. It's all.
I know.
Actually, speaking of which, it is a question somebody asked earlier here. They kind of want a comparison between Iceberg and Hudi. In the case of a streaming pipeline, he says Hudi performs better. So maybe he didn't win the war there, but tell us.
He asked my question. This is great. I wanted to get to this. Yeah.
So okay. The bottom line is that when it comes down to it, Hudi has been best known for their capabilities for merge on read upserts, right? They have a lot of extra basically services that are running in the background, validating, and they have to basically do a per table process to manage this thing. And I don't want to get too far in the weeds of like, saying my opinions on this, because you can kind of read my thoughts on Hudi on the blog. Okay. I don't want to spend the whole time kind of like nitpicking our competitors across, but what I will say is the closest analogy that I dream up in my head about when I think about, using the Hudi platform versus using like Iceberg or Delta is I relate Hudi to the early days when you were thinking about like, Hadoop and how they solve problems. Anytime you had a new problem that came up in Hadoop, it would be a new service that some user would have to manage. The developer experience in early day Hadoop was just horrible. And you had to constantly think about, well, okay, I have all these services, things were constantly crashing, trying to keep the communications up and all this kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, you can add more stuff, more features that do things for you out of the box, but they're really ultimately adding a more difficult developer experience if they're not entailing that's something that's 100% invisible to the users that are running these things. And the thing that I generally hear when I'm talking to people running Hudi is that it's just difficult. It's a difficult thing to set up and run. It's difficult to understand when problems go wrong there. And the reason why they're talking about all these features is because, yeah, like they want this to be something that does everything for you. But if it's almost like when people are like, hey, I want to use ChatGPT to write some code for me in a language I don't know. Oh, okay. The other day I was like, oh, I want to write this little Ruby plugin. Let me just ask ChatGPT to do it for me. So then ChatGPT goes and does it for me, and I copy paste it in there, and then all of a sudden it's not working. Well, why is this not working? Well, now I got to go learn Ruby to debug the code that ChatGPT wrote for me. So my point is with all of this is like, when you have it's not always kind to the user to just give them out of the box features, especially if the out of the box is like a very broken holy box. So that's all I want to say on there.
Not controversial at all.
Let's maybe switch gears. Let's maybe switch gears. There's a topic that everyone wants to hear about Iceberg. You want to talk about data mesh? We got about 30 minutes left.
All right.
We never got to it the first time you were on the show. So
yeah. So basically, when I was trying to get with data mesh, right? This was a very abrupt jump.
Well,
over.
I mean, it's
Joe, just
put a
push
hard
the
stop.
button.
Yeah, just push the button. It's fine.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, one quick thing of summary so that we can do a nice, slightly smoother transition is that I really, the whole goal of that sentiment was like, I wanted to share my true, honest thoughts one time, and maybe now this is the second time. Thanks, Joe. But the ultimate thing I'm trying to convey here is that I think that we all need to get all of these different table formats under one spec. There can be multiple implementations, and so at the moment, to me, it's an arms race between Delta Lake and Iceberg. What I personally hope to see within the Delta Lake community, I've talked to Denny about this a couple of times, and so he seems receptive, and he said some people, at Databricks side are a little receptive to it as well. So my hope is that, hey, we understand like Delta Lake has its own spec, right? Has its own thing that's going on, but at the end of the day, like people perceive this as a project that is primarily governed and run by Databricks. That's why you'll never have a Snowflake that will adopt Delta Lake spec. It's just not going to happen. And whether that's true or not, I'm not here to argue that. My argument is that Snowflake will never adopt Delta Lake. One of the things I do hear the Databricks people talking about is like, oh, we have, Microsoft support. And this kind of thing for Delta Lake only. But that's only a short-term thing. Microsoft's eventually going to have to get in on the game to, like with everybody else right now, to actually be supporting, the standard that will effectively be uniform now that Databricks has opened up the Pandora's box and Snowflake opened it up a long time ago, right? And just increased on it. So what we in the Iceberg community are trying to do right now is build upon kind of what does it mean to be Iceberg compliant, and which, and effectively, have a body of either people in the community, or potentially we're also, throwing this kind of stuff around of like getting maybe, Tabular or somebody to offer an official certification of sorts, right? And then at that point, Tabular being not a query engine could go evaluate query engines to basically say, hey, this is the level of compatibility that this query engine or this data warehouse or this whatever has across the board. And that's going to just that's there to inform users what they should care about. So on the features list, right, here are the lists of features that are very important in Iceberg. here are the query engines that effectively, are somewhat in some way, stage, or form compatible. And now, based on your needs, does the query engine that you want to use actually solve those needs? What's missing? And can you push on that vendor to support and get closer to native support? Once you actually move out of that, then it gets to this new level. The same thing we were talking about with data virtualization. You get to this same level where people are effectively able to say, okay, well, I am using this query engine now, or I'm using this data warehouse now, and I actually think, this particular use case doesn't fit well in this query engine or use case, right? I want to move it over here, and it's going to require that I have the data stored in stored in either twice or multiple formats, right? If I wanted to go out of Snowflake. Well, now that's not the case. You could actually, at least interchange and talk to Snowflake as if it's Iceberg. It's not Iceberg underneath that, and that gets you one step closer. The next step closer would be everybody's storing the data all the way from the metadata all the way down to the core data. Everybody's storing on that same native format, and that if that's what you need, if you need everything to be sitting there in S3 for cheaper storage or something like that, then that should be the next option that you should be able to have. And so we want to basically make this visible to the community, so that you can then understand, pick and choose what's important to you, what's not, and then use the query engines that you want to use when you want to use them, right? And same way that SQL gives you this, kind of general flexibility, we want to have that same level of flexibility on that data layer. And then it gives you all these other benefits like, trying to centralize like security and all these other things across multiple query engines that have different security models. So anyways, that's really what my vision expanded from just data virtualization. The next layer down, we really want to see this like nice spec around the abstraction of, transforming these files into something that could be basically transforming these files into something that's, digestible by SQL or eventually maybe other standards, right?
Let me ask a question real quick about the compatibility situation. So my complaint about ANSI SQL is that if I take Snowflake ANSI SQL, BigQuery ANSI SQL, Databricks ANSI SQL, they really aren't compatible. I take any real world query and I try to move it, and I have to do some work to translate it. So how does that compare today with the Iceberg compatibility situation across these platforms?
So today, I mean, it's fairly simple compared to what, it's like SQL's been around for so long and there's been so many different use cases that have come up around it. Today, I mean, if you think about Iceberg being, potentially the spec that becomes the long version spec of how we do data lake houses moving forward, right? That we're in easy times today because we are only dealing with generally like object storage assumptions. We can, it can run on HDFS still and all that kind of stuff, but there are still levels of complexity of things that you might want to do in the future that keeps the spec relatively simple at this point. Where that goes long term is still a bit undeterminable, but for right now, it's very clear. Like these are we'll be making this clear hopefully in the next couple months, and showcasing like this feature list / kind of matrix on which query engines actually support what. But ultimately, trying to give this basic capability of. I lost my train of thought there. Actually, can you repeat the question one more time?
The original question was just about compatibility in SQL and how compatible Iceberg is. But I guess at this point we could just move on to say, how is Iceberg going to interact with data mesh? I think that's the big one kind of that Joe was getting at. So
to finally answer your question, though. Okay, good. Well, to finally answer that, I just lost where I was going with that whole thing. I do want to finish it out. The compatibility right now is relatively simple. Like you either just support the metadata layer, And so you're effectively building out a couple, Avro files that are, acting kind of, you think about it as like a tree, right? I think about it like almost like try to picture a binary tree or some sort of like, traditional data structure tree. But instead of like, there's the root that's just sitting in, a database or a catalog somewhere, what Iceberg calls catalogs. And then all of the, nodes in that tree are scattered across S3 in a file somewhere, right? And so all of these things are literally like pointers to other nodes on this tree until you eventually get to the data node at the bottom. And ultimately, this is how you push down queries, filter, and all this kind of stuff. The difference is that if you're going to just support Iceberg as an external table or as an external entity like Snowflake did in the beginning, you're just using any other Iceberg client externally as like a JDBC. The second level would be supporting metadata, building the metadata on top of it, but still pointing to your own proprietary storage. And you have the internal engine that understands that proprietary storage, but then is simply speaking somewhat of the language or the layout of Iceberg. And then going the final ones, that we call that kind of like interchange format. And then the final one would be actually storing down at the file level, like, the non-proprietary version, the very open version of Parquet. And so, or any other open file format that Iceberg supports. So anyways, let's go on to the next one now. I just wanted to finish that one for you because I lost my train of thought in the middle there. Okay, so data mesh. I know it's a dying conversation right now, and that's exactly why I want to talk about it.
Why is it dying?
I actually agree. Go ahead.
I think it's dying because there was the initial kind of hype cycle that goes out with a lot of these initial ideas, and vendors and people wanted to capture the initial interest. And what's unfortunate about the hype, like what's fortunate and unfortunate, like vendors will quickly get the word out to as many people as possible and kind of generate the sense of like, I should probably check this thing out, right? But as soon as it becomes like a lot of times the vendor messaging is really just like repeated. It's almost like, and let's get back to another AI ChatGPT analogy. It's almost like, you'll see one vendor do the initial message and then they all say that same message. They've like, the one will put out the words there, and then that becomes input to the next set of vendors kind of messaging around it, right? So my whole point with that is that we want to basically be able to have a real conversation around data mesh now. The core principles behind data mesh were neither novel nor really difficult to understand. Like, it's the same thing that like data virtualization, all this stuff, right? It's stuff that's been done multiple times, just not called that and not centralized together. And I think the most novel of any of these things we're really talking about, any of the principles that Zhamak was laying out, was actually the federated computational governance. Mm-hmm. That part is particularly interesting to me in that, how do we, so, it looked into this thing, the concept of how the socio-technical aspects, right? How when we have a meeting and a conversation, how do I transcribe the takeaways from that meeting into, either a product, like, product Jira tickets that I need to send to my engineers, or, things that I need to get updated in legal, all that stuff. Like, is there a way to, kind of shorten the gap between what we as humans have to do to translate some specification, something that they throw out, like, hey, you need to, make sure that this data gets deleted after this day. Oh, wait, no, we're going to change it to this day, 2 weeks later or something like that. How can you shorten that cycle between having those conversations and then getting it directly into the system so that the system will take care of that for you, rather than you potentially fumbling the actual message in between, or not delivering it with the exact specs, this kind of thing. So there was this really cool podcast with Zhamak on it, and Sam Ramji. He is one of the strategy officers at DataStax.
Yep.
And I love his show. He has a show called Open Source Data.
Sure.
So definitely check out that show. Yeah, he was talking to her, and this was like, again, at the early phases of data mesh. And at this part at the end, he kind of started making this analogy to something that they had built internally in Google when he was working there. And it was like, basically, they had everything down to like a YAML file. It sounded very much like Kubernetes. They had everything down to like, representing the state of of the data in a YAML file, and you would just feed that to the system, and the system would be able to understand it. It was basically Kubernetes for data. And so once that was mentioned as kind of the way that you achieve, because like the other three ones were obvious. I was like, well, you just use Trino or any other virtualization platform to get most of what you need for data mesh. But that final one was like still a big question box for me. How do you get the governance part all aligned and all these things? And so getting back to like, if you think about the whole analogy of data mesh is to a service mesh, right? It's to actually building out something like Kubernetes, but you would need it for data. So it's almost very obvious in this same analogy to think of what do we have. We have Kubernetes for ops now, which is Terraform or something like that. Infrastructure as code. We have Kubernetes for services. Why not have Kubernetes that is a set of specifications that build around how our data is structured, the policies around that data, who can touch it, and all that kind of stuff. Why not have that represented in a YAML file that when we have a meeting, I can literally have everybody who's on that meeting look at the change, the delta, and a Git hub file somewhere to see, hey, we've updated this policy from 90 days to 120 days until it gets deleted, or till it moves on to another system, and this kind of thing. And the system at that point, there's going to be multiple vendors, just like we have in Kubernetes, that supply, different features that the spec of Kubernetes supports. We would also have yet another kind of backbone to talk to that says, hey, for instance, if you want to move a query from here to here, well, Trino can do that. So use Trino as the underlying query engine, or Starburst, or Athena, or any of these other variants of it. And then you just specify the engine that gets called for that. And then it should know have the correct SQL syntax to move from here to here. And so that was a big mind-blowing moment for me to kind of like think, wow, that would be incredible if we could do that in an open community at scale. Because what that means is now when I have a meeting with you, Joe, and you're telling me, hey, legal just said we have to change it from here to here, the SLAs have updated. All I do is make a change in my Git file, and the system does the rest for me at that point, right? So it's not a panacea, right? Obviously, like, people still struggle with Kubernetes deployments today. It brings up new problems, but I think it's kind of the trend, and it kind of follows what has worked really well in the service world. We need to kind of keep replicating that and keep having the conversation around data mesh to talk about replicating that at the data layer. Gosh.
So here's an organizational question. Do we have to have a central platform team? I mean, I think that's kind of been a question in terms of organizational data mesh deployment. Can each team just act independently, or do you still need a
We're also ignoring the
team
larger
excluded?
question of kind of between companies too.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
Organizations, right? That's
let's start out.
It's decentralized data sharing is what it's about at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So the intercompany thing is, like, I think kind of it's a bit of a red herring, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, let's start out just within a company at first, right? Because let's say, just that the intercompany thing is actually, I think, fairly recent developments that we're even comfortable doing that type of stuff. Because stuff of, like, in the last 10, since really kind of like HDFS Hadoop stuff, that's when we really started to get back to, unless you were like a conglomerate that has like, that is your business, is just to share data. Nobody would be sharing their data. Now that's seeming to become more frequent, more common from any other company to say, hey, we'll sell you our data basically, and here's how you tap into it. And that's just another source of revenue. So I definitely seeing that trend, but first let's solve the problem internal to one company. So, if I'm running this as a single company, in terms of like, do I centralize everything? Do I decentralize? I think the same answer, again, let's pull from the service mesh analogy. Everybody was saying, oh, microservices, that's going to solve all of our problems. And like, what are we seeing today? Like where everybody's going back to, some mix of monolith. But I also think like swinging the pendulum in either direction of saying you need to have all of this or you need to have all of that, it's never that. It always depends. And then you always like the things you need to be comfortable with in engineering in general is that it depends answer, and to learn what are the variables that I'm going to play with to understand whether this use case should be centralized or whether this use case should get spread across, multiple teams that own this. And there's never going to be a 100% right answer. I think people want like 100% right answers to like that. And it's going to be like, no, you're going to pick the better of like the worst, like you're going to like avoid the worst possible like choice, right? And try to get the best, optimize for the best possible choice that you understand in that moment. And you're going to make some wrong decisions. You're going to make some good decisions, but you're like trying to go to where it's like all this or all that is like increasing your odds at making the wrong decision, in my opinion, in most cases as well, right? So always it depends. I don't know. Did that make sense, or did I just? Okay.
I think so. I mean, I think in general, I call this purity-oriented thinking, right? And in any domain, like being really extreme and saying this is absolutely how it is always is not a good idea. On the other hand, I mean, one of the things we write about in our book is the idea that architects are not there just for command and control, but more for leadership, to set standards and say, this is, unless there's a good reason to do something else, this is probably what you should be building around as a standard. And so it could be data mesh in this case, for example.
Yeah. And to, to be fair, I think there will be a portion that stays like centralized to what you would traditionally consider a, data lakehouse or data warehouse or just data platform team in general. I think that still makes sense because sometimes you want to offload, like sometimes the problem is not just such a domain focused thing. It's actually something maybe more focused on like making sure the data is correct, accurate, and needs more attention or like visibility from a single team that makes sure to take care of all these conflicts. And I think that sometimes, you having that central team that's kind of blockers, the blockers to, I want the schema change. Well, we can't do that because we see the whole world here and we kind of know that's a bad idea. And that's good. That's the socio-technical part that's very valuable about having that centralized component. But you don't want that to be the place where, again, swinging in that original pendulum where we had everything there, then that team ends up owning things that they don't even understand. Right. So I think the delicate balance is trying to figure out like, hey, what is reasonable for this core data team to understand and try to work through basically the cross-cutting concerns. They're effectively like, if you think about aspect programming, they're the little aspect things that go into everything like logging or something like that. They're everywhere. But then, they help out with just about everything. Then you have the other kind of specialists that understand the domain a lot better. And that's where you're, in a very specific part of code. So I'd say it's like, you just have to balance it between there. Sometimes it's going to make sense to centralize it all to one thing and make sure that data is talking correctly across multiple aspects of your company. And then the other side is going to be like, you don't want to dump all of the information load onto that one team. You want to spread that out and have experts in each subject. So I think the answer is both.
Well, and we actually had Bill Inman on the show. What was that, Joe? About a year and a half ago. But anyway, he invented the data warehouse concept. And he said, I'm not anti-data mesh. It's more that if you had data mesh, you still need like the curation team, kind of like the museum curators who are like, this is standardized. Everyone has a common interface to data. But then if you need something specific, you can reach across teams to whatever they make available through the data mesh.
Totally. Yeah. So I totally agree with that.
We'll see where it goes. Yeah. But I do agree. There was a lot of mesh washing for the past couple of years. And I think that, and now all the same companies are now AI vendors, which is kind of funny. So it's just what a shit show of an industry we have.
Now I think it's the perfect time then to have the conversations about mesh, because now we're not going to get inundated, right, with like blah blah, and everybody's a little burnt out on it. But let's have real conversations about it now. What does this actually mean, right?
Well, now the path of enlightenment, I think that the Gartner hype cycle would call it. So or the trough of disillusionment. I think we're in one of the two, maybe on the upslope. But no, I think it's time for real conversations about it. So I'm glad everyone moved off to AI and whatever else is next after that.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Superconductor is the next thing, right? You guys hear
right. Yeah. Room temperature superconductors as a couple.
Everyone's been talking about that. It's kind of funny. So we'll become superconductor companies.
I saw. Yeah, I mean, again, very wild theories. And the first thing on the headline is this is going to be bigger than ChatGPT, all the like AI words, and combined with all this other stuff. I'm just like, oh my god, here we go again.
How about cold fusion? Can we bring that back too, please?
Let's do it. Yeah, I like it. Okay. Well, yeah. So, I mean, I think we actually pretty well nailed both of those, like the core concepts I was trying to cover. Sure.
Let me just check real quick here. We kept
yeah. Let's get the pitchforks.
You want to discuss and topic everyone wants to hear about Iceberg. So, yeah. Good job.
Yeah. Oh, and for anybody who's like listening to this on the podcast, like we're occasionally pulling up this meme that I made. So, now you need to go to the YouTube channel version of this, subscribe, and there you go. And
shout out. Yep. Or Spotify.
Most
people listen to this on Spotify, surprisingly enough.
But you can watch it on Spotify, right, Joe? Like
you can watch it on
pull
Spotify,
it up on your phone. Yeah.
You can.
Oh yeah. They just added that in. I saw like Mark, the guy that wrote the art of not giving a F.
Okay.
Mark. He started out with that was the first time I saw like that you could do video podcasts on that, and I love that guy. So
that's good. Check the All In podcast. I do that a lot. So,
do I have any picketers here? Do I have to answer anybody else's?
I don't know. Pick the ones you want here. There's a lot of questions, but some of them I think kind of go back to the beginning of the show. Y'all should have tuned in earlier. This be a lesson to you. As we switch around.
Let's see. Let me see. Mesh versus fabric. I have no thoughts on that. I actually still don't know what. Like, I didn't know if that was like for real. Like, I don't know.
Every time I know data fabric, I get more confused. It's just a made up thing.
Yeah, I think it's a nuance within the vendor side. I haven't dug into it enough yet to actually know if there is a difference, but I know that like one company that was using Trino for a fabric thing eventually like called it a mesh thing. So I don't think it matters. I don't know.
I thought fabric was very Gartner specific somehow. Like they were
maybe
this idea.
Because they got pissed off about mesh. They started. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So maybe it's that. I sometimes I sometimes tune into vendor politics and sometimes I don't. Like, the whole Apache Iceberg driving different vendor politics, like between the Snowflake and Databricks thing was very interesting to me. But then like Gartner is just way too high level for me of like.
Yeah, that's a rumor on the streets anyway. They can't confirm, but that's what I heard from people in the know. They kind of did their own thing. So I don't know. Yeah. This is what it is. Now they're off being a AI pundit.
So, that same user shakes their fist at the cloud. So somebody said shocked he didn't say contracts. Yeah, contracts are definitely picking up here.
Data contracts. Yeah, that's
we missed that one. What else? I think data contracts. I think data contracts are good. I don't know. I still only see them as schemas. I know there's more than that. And I think I actually watched a little bit of the one that you guys did with what's his name?
Chad Sanderson and
Chad. Yeah, it was Chad. And so he has great ideas about it. I just always forget. Like as soon as I'll watch that, I'm like, oh, interesting take, and then I'll walk away and I'll be like, wait, what did he say about that? It's still just a schema in my head. It's still just a schema, but no, I know it's more than that. I just don't know.
He thinks a lot about this. I'll be on tour with him in a couple weeks in Australia, so looking forward to that. So
nice.
Yeah,
check that out. I'm not saying so it's Iceberg on top of S3 and then the query engine Spark. Yeah, so that's a good good question to talk about. So Iceberg is effectively it's Sorab. So basically, it's S3 is, storing actual files, right? Parquet, JSON, CSV, like all these different files that they'll store. What Iceberg does is it's the layer that kind of sits in between and says, okay, I'm going to talk to this blob, this file. I should know, depending on the type of file, I might be able to only pull out the segment that's relevant to me or not. So hopefully it's Parquet or something. I'm going to pull that blob of data out. And then that layer is basically Iceberg's basically the model that says, okay, how do I translate from this blob of data to, the data that's actually coming back and SQL to, visualize to the end user. And so this should almost, like, the goal of Iceberg is to make this look as much like a database as you can, not exposing system internals, right? We don't want to expose partitions or any of these things that we went to when we went to the big data realm. We want to be able to do schema evolution. We want to do all these different things. And if you don't have that, it's not a database to that person anymore. It gets away from that. And so that's what the Iceberg spec particularly as well. Like, aside from just getting all this vendor, kind of plus ones here and there, we also have, the core spec itself brings us back to basically getting that data warehouse experience on the data lake. And that's why, Snowflake is confident in using it, because they can also assume, an equal level of SQL support for their customers. So that's you were right. It is a kind of a layer in between the S3 and the query engine.
And to me, the big novelty over Hive, because the Hive Metastore has been popular for this purpose for at least 5 years, ever since Hive was starting to go away, actually, ironically, but is that you can manage updates. To your point about the data warehouse experience, it can manage updates in a very transparent way, so the user doesn't have to think about that.
Yep.
I think they even had Hive Acid at one point way back in the day.
Yeah.
That again, all, to one of my comments before, right, is like the goal was like, hey, if we build another service around it, then this is the way that we're going to solve ACID. And it's not. It comes up with all sorts of state problems and all sorts of other issues that depend on the situation where you're deploying this in, and it becomes an extra strain on the experience of the user. So that's ultimately, why we on Iceberg side, we're trying to figure out, how do we do this with taking away enough pain, especially from the end user, and then just enough pain, for the user that's actually going out and deploying this stuff, without, making it super, smoke and mirrors, and you don't know how to debug your system, right? So
cool. Probably a good time to wrap up. Any cool announcements, things you're working on, events you'll be talking at, birthday parties you'll be working out on the way?
Yeah, I got a bar mitzvah coming up this weekend. No,
okay. Balloon animals, maybe.
Actually, clown. It's funny.
No. You guys missed the whole spot. I was going to dress up as Commander Bun Bun. No, so I'm kind of at this point kind of laying low a little bit, just I am popping up on podcasts here and there. At this point, I'm really, locked in trying to build out documentation around Iceberg. It's needing some improvement now, especially with all the interest in it. And so that's really where I'm focusing a lot of my attention, less on the advocacy side for now. But I will be popping up around various query engine events that those support, and I just don't have anything 100% locked in to tell you about now. But yeah, definitely. Just if you have any questions on Iceberg, please go to the Iceberg Slack. Go to iceberg.apache.org. Well, there's a little link on the top, and then you can just ask me any further questions that you all have for me there. I'm also on LinkedIn. If you find me anywhere on Bits on Data Dev, there's a little thing here on the video screen here, and yeah, that's how you find me.
Cool, awesome. Matt, you? Anything new going on?
Not at the moment. How about you, Joe? It sounds like you're going to be in Australia very soon.
Atlanta next week.
Nice.
Next Thursday, DBT and I are doing a road show. So if you're in Atlanta, stop by that. Hit me up. So in Australia, speaking at Utah Data Engineering Meetup on the 16th as well. So
yeah, check that out. It should be a good talk. I mean, you're going to be talking about data modeling, correct?
Yeah, keeping it old school.
Nice.
And do we know the situation with streaming yet, if it's going to be on a stream or?
I think it's up to my organizer.
Okay. All right.
Nice.
Probably stream, but we'll find out. So, or not. You just need to show up, I guess. So awesome. Cool. Yeah. Well, thanks for being on the show, Brian. Thanks to the audience.
For having me.
Yeah. Next week, got John O'Gorman on the show talking about all things semantics. So that'll be a bit of a diversion from this, but it is what it is. That's why people like the show, I guess, or hate it, one of the two. So,
well, I love it. So
thank you. We love you too.
Thanks for being here. This was great. It's a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, maybe day-to-day Texas. Yeah, it's from Lynn. Yeah, so I think we'll be Matt and I will be there. Somebody commented too. I'm like on two different rosters for the show, so giving a talk, and then Matt and I have the end of day panel discussion or town hall, I guess it's called.
Yeah, we ran it as a town hall, so we'll do it.
What was the situation with that, Matt, for everybody? Why did we do that?
I think so it's closing out the conference, and at that point there are drinks and people are ready to kind of be done thinking really hard about data problems. And so this last year we decided it was a good time just to have an open conversation about the state of the industry, the conference, kind of a, wrapping up, closing things out, summarizing. And we're going to do the same thing this year.
A lot of heavy hitters in the audience too. A lot of good combos, like Shamak and Bill and Min were sitting next to each other, and it's good to heckle them. So Sam Ramji was there. A lot of people. So great time, Brian. You should show up to it. Be good.
I will when my kids are a little older.
I got it.
Okay.
I got little ones. So, but as they grow up, I think I'll have a little more. I'll feel less guilty if I go to one of these things. I just got to be very choosy.
Are there any data conferences in Chicago that we should be aware of?
There's
GoTo. We're supposed to be talking about that.
Yeah. There was a GoTo actually a while back, and then I think I need to check out and see when the next one is. But GoTo is a big one, and then just occasionally here and there some pop up. So I mean, please, anybody who is like a vendor listening to this, please have your thing in Chicago. I would love to go there and speak, and I will, I'll do it for free because I don't have to.
In a rabbit suit too. This would be great.
I'll do it in a rabbit suit. I'll do whatever you want me to do. Just do it at Chicago. It's got great food. We have amazing food.
Rumor is Matt and I are going to be at GoTo. Haven't confirmed yet, but I think that's the plan.
Oh, so, cool. Yeah. Maybe I'll see you guys there then. Yeah.
End of October. Yeah, I just need to juggle around. I'm just traveling so damn much. Just need to figure out a good time.
I feel you there, man. I'm not jealous of how often you travel.
I'm not either. Just kind of go on autopilot. It's like out of body experience, kind of.
Yeah, just become a zombie. You're just on the plane, just which plane am I on?
Oh, it happens. Yeah, you don't even know what city you're in. It's like the Hello Cleveland moment in Spinal Tap.
Oh yeah, Hello Cleveland. Yeah, love it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, cool.
Good luck.
Thanks to the audience. Fun. Thanks, man. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me again.
See y'all soon. Bye-bye.
See you guys.